Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're going deep on men's redemption, from apocalypse to new creation. It's by Conrad Riker.
And given, your interest in men's rights, I think, especially in marriage and how society's changed, well, there might be some interesting stuff here for you.
It's funny you say societal shifts, because that's where Riker really starts.
Yeah.
He kind of paints this picture of the world being totally upside down, traditional roles flipped on their head, and he thinks that left a lot of men feeling lost.
Yeah, like lost at sea.
Yeah, like they don't know what their purpose is anymore.
Right, and it's kind of what a lot of guys in the Married Red Pill subreddit are saying, right?
Yeah.
Like the system's working against them. And then you bring in this whole thing about covert contracts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Riker thinks that, feminism's push for equality, which on a surface sounds good, right?
Yeah.
But it's messed up those unspoken agreements we have in marriage.
Is like who does what
Yeah.
expectations.
Exactly.
Like they changed the rules of the game, but no one told us the new rules. Right. And so you get confusion, you get resentment. And Riker points out that, marriage rates have just plummeted.
Like how much are we talking?
Well, get this. In 1960, it was 72%. 2020, 50%.
Whoa. That is a huge drop. So, okay, but how does this tie into covert contracts specifically? Can you give me like an example of how these blurred lines actually play out in a marriage?
Okay, well, think about it. Traditionally, men were the providers. Women, home and family.
Right, classic setup.
But now, both partners are working, both bringing in money, but the expectations around like chores and who handles the emotional stuff haven't really changed.
So are you saying men feel resentful because they're still expected to be the breadwinner, even though their wives work too? And then on the flip side, women are frustrated because they're working and doing most of the stuff at home.
Exactly. And it's all unspoken, right? These covert contracts. It's like a breeding ground for arguments and resentment.
And Riker lays this all with the seed of feminism and the push for equality.
He does. He thinks the feminist movement, while aiming for equality, created this weird double bind for men.
Double bind.
Yeah, so society tells men to be strong, assertive, but then those same qualities are labeled as toxic.
Be strong, but not too strong. Be a leader, but don't be bossy.
Exactly.
So it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
That's the double bind.
And how does this play into marriage and the covert contracts thing?
Riker says it carries right over into those expectations. A husband might be praised for, being assertive at work, but at home, he's domineering.
It's funny because you hear that in the red pill community a lot. Like men are judged differently now than they were in the past. Does Riker talk about that at all?
Oh, yeah. He actually thinks modern society has basically demonized what we think of as traditional masculinity.
You mean like the strong, silent type?
Yeah, the strength, the assertiveness, the willingness to lead. Those are all seen as bad things now, even dangerous.
So how are men supposed to handle this new world? Does he have any solutions?
He does. He says men need to reclaim their masculinity.
Okay, but not like the alpha male thing, right?
No, not about dominance or aggression. He says true masculinity is about protection, provision, and leadership.
So being a strong and responsible man, but in a way that lines up with those traditional values.
Exactly. And he uses real examples to make his point.
Oh, like who? Yeah. I love a good historical example.
He talks about George Washington, Winston Churchill, men who showed real courage and responsibility, real leadership when things were tough.
Big shoes to fill. But I get what he's saying. He's looking at those classic masculine qualities, but in a good way, in a way that made a difference. But how does he think regular guys like you and me can actually do that today?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Riker says that biologically and spiritually, men are wired to be protectors and providers.
Like, he uses that example of the men on the Titanic who sacrificed themselves, right? I remember that from the book.
Yeah, he does. It's a powerful example of that instinct to protect, to provide. And he says we shouldn't suppress that, shame it. We should understand it, use it for good.
But how do you tap into that in a world where, like Riker says, being a man, like a traditionally masculine man, is a bad thing?
That's the question, isn't it? And Riker thinks it starts with understanding those core principles that really drive positive masculinity. Not just the physical stuff, but the spiritual side, too.
Okay, this is where I kind of got lost in the book. He starts talking about faith, hope, and charity. What's that got to do with men's rights? Or even those covert contracts in a marriage?
I know, it seems like a jump, but stick with me. Riker sees these as like cosmic principles, not just nice ideas. Like they actually govern reality. And they're super important for men today, he says.
Okay, so like faith in yourself, hope for the future, being charitable to others. Yeah, those are good things, but I still don't see how it connects to, say, dealing with the challenges of marriage today.
Okay, let's break it down. Riker says faith gives you strength when things are uncertain. Think about it. In your marriage, how many times do you face a challenge and you're like, what do I even do here? That's where faith comes in. Faith in yourself, in your partner, in something bigger. Gives you the strength to keep going.
Okay, yeah. Faith is resilience, like to work through those rough patches. Got it. What about hope then?
Riker thinks hope is what drives us forward. Without hope, why even try to make things better in your relationship or in your life, right?
Hope is what fuels those tough conversations, those attempts to like renegotiate those covert contracts we were talking about.
Yeah,
It's that belief that things can get better.
yeah, I get that. Holding on to hope when things are tough, that's super important. So what about charity?
Charity, for Riker, isn't just about giving money. It's about strengthening your community.
Hmm.
So in a marriage, it's like being generous, being understanding, willing to compromise.
So these principles, they're like the tools to build a stronger base for yourself and for your marriage. Exactly. They give you a way to deal with the complicated parts of relationships, especially all those unspoken expectations, those covert contracts that can cause so much trouble.
But it's not all about sitting back and just hoping for the best, right?
Yeah.
I remember Riker talking about men needing to, like, step up, take action, take control.
You're right. He talks about this hero's journey thing. Might sound a bit cheesy, but it's actually a really good way to picture what he's talking about.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
It's this idea that men are meant to face challenges head on, to go up against their fears, to push themselves to become something more. You mentioned the red pill philosophy earlier, right? Isn't that kind of about men taking control of their lives, their relationships, and making their own destiny?
Yeah, there are definitely some similarities there. This whole idea of men stepping up, being responsible, not being afraid to, like, challenge the way things are. So what does that look like in real life, though?
Raker says it all starts with knowing yourself. What are you good at? What are your weaknesses? What do you believe in? What do you actually want out of life, out of your relationships?
So, like, taking a good, hard look in the mirror before you try to change the world.
Exactly. And once you've got that figured out, then it's about taking action, not just complaining about how unfair things are, but actually going out and creating the life, the relationship that you want.
So in a marriage, that could mean having those tough conversations about the covert contracts, right? Setting boundaries, being clear about what you need, and working with your partner to make things more balanced and, well, happier.
Exactly. And it's not just about your personal life either. Riker thinks this hero's journey applies to how men act in society too. He says men need to be leaders, to stand up for what they believe in and work to make the world a better place.
That sounds a lot like what some of the guys in the red pill community are saying,
Yeah.
pushing back against a system that seems rigged against them.
Yeah, there's definitely a shared feeling there. Riker's really critical of what he sees as the bad parts of modern culture, especially feminism and what he calls cultural Marxism. He thinks these ideas have made men weaker, messed up traditional values, and basically created chaos.
It's going to be a controversial take for some people,
Yeah.
but I can see how it would resonate with men who feel like they're being attacked or put down just for being men.
Right. Riker doesn't shy away from challenging the usual way of thinking, and he speaks directly to those who feel like they're not being listened to. But he doesn't just complain, he offers solutions too.
Like what?
He says men need to reclaim their masculinity, embrace their roles as protectors, providers, and leaders. He thinks men have a specific and crucial role to play in bringing back order, purpose, and meaning to the world.
So it's not just about complaining, it's about being part of the solution.
Exactly. Riker's message is all about empowerment. He's telling men to step up, be responsible, be the heroes of their own lives, and build a better future.
That's a powerful message. But how does he think men can actually do that?
He's got this multifaceted approach. It starts with personal development, working on those virtues we talked about earlier, faith, hope, and charity.
Those are the foundation, right?
Right. From there, he says self-discipline is key, working hard and striving for excellence. He also says men should find mentors, build strong communities with other men who share their values.
Makes sense. Having a good support system is huge, especially when you're going against the current.
Absolutely. And lastly, he says facing your fears and embracing that hero's journey is crucial. He thinks real strength and fulfillment come from overcoming obstacles, not running away from them.
And how does he suggest men apply this to their relationships, especially marriage and all those covert contracts?
He's all about open and honest communication, setting clear boundaries, and talking about what you each expect. He thinks men should be upfront about what they need and want and work with their partners to create a more balanced and fair dynamic.
But being assertive, but not aggressive.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot between strength and vulnerability, between leading with confidence and being willing to meet in the middle.
Sounds like a tall order.
It is. But Riker thinks men are up for it. He sees this masculine redemption, as he calls it, as super important, not just for men themselves, but for the whole of society.
It's interesting how he ties those two things together. It's not just about individual happiness for men, it's about their role in the bigger picture.
Right. He thinks men have a responsibility to their families, their communities, to humanity itself.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about his theories, but I'm curious about how he thinks men can actually put these ideas into action. Does he have any specific examples?
He does. He talks about taking control of your finances, being responsible for providing, and being involved in your kids' lives. He also stresses physical fitness, mental toughness, and having a purpose beyond just work and buying stuff.
Sounds like he's advocating for a more well-rounded way of being a man, something that combines the traditional and the modern.
Exactly. He doesn't want to go back to some perfect past, but to rethink traditional values for the world today.
So it's about being a strong and responsible man in a world that often seems to look down on those qualities.
Yeah, and about challenging those ideas that try to put men into these tiny limiting boxes.
That's a powerful message, especially for guys who are struggling to figure out where they fit in a world that feels so confusing and contradictory. But some of what Riker says is going to be pretty controversial, right?
Definitely. His views on feminism, especially, are going to rub some people the wrong way. But that's what makes his work so interesting. He isn't afraid to challenge what everyone thinks and offer a different perspective, one that might connect with men who feel like they're not being heard.
And that's what's great about the deep dive.
Right.
We're not here to tell you what to think, but to give you different ideas so you can make up your own mind.
Exactly. We're giving you the tools to think critically and figure these things out for yourself.
And in this case, those tools come in the form of Conrad Riker's book, Men's Redemption. It's a tough read, but like we've been talking about, it's full of insights that might just change how you see things. So for our listener, he's trying to make sense of all this, trying to apply it to his own life, his marriage. What are like the biggest things to take away from Men's Redemption, especially thinking about the red pill stuff he's into?
I think the core message is that men have a choice. You can either just accept the role society tries to hand you, or you can fight to redefine what it means to be a man today.
It's about taking control, right? Not just blaming everyone else, but actually doing something to change things.
Exactly. And for Riker, that starts with understanding those covert contracts. Remember those. He wants men to have those tough conversations with their partners, to be honest about what they need, what they expect, and to try to build something better together.
So not trying to go back to the 1950s, but figuring out how to make traditional values work in the world today.
Right. It's about being a strong, responsible man without falling into those old stereotypes. And realizing that women have changed too. Their roles and expectations aren't the same either.
It sounds exhausting, though,
Right.
honestly.
It is work, for sure. But Riker thinks it's worth it. He thinks that men who take on this challenge, they'll find a kind of satisfaction and fulfillment that they wouldn't have otherwise.
It ties back into that hero's journey thing, doesn't it? The idea that you have to face challenges, not run from them, to really grow.
Exactly. He uses examples like Nelson Mandela, Steve Jobs, guys who went through some serious stuff but came out on top. And he says every man has that potential. It's about finding that strength inside you and using it to make your life and the lives of those around you better.
I was also thinking about our listeners' interest in the history of all this. Riker spends a lot of time on how traditional institutions have fallen apart and how things like feminism and what he calls cultural Marxism have taken over. Does he have any thoughts on how we got here?
He does. He says these ideologies, they sound all progressive and liberating, but they've actually hurt men and society. He thinks they've created this culture where everyone's a victim and no one takes responsibility, and that they've destroyed the values that used to give us stability and meaning.
That's a pretty strong statement. But I can see how it would appeal to men who feel like they've been unfairly attacked or silenced in the last few decades.
Exactly. And whether you agree with him or not, I think it's important to at least understand his perspective and to think about how these, historical and ideological forces might be affecting us today.
It's about connecting the dots, right? Seeing how the past has shaped the present and what that might mean for the future.
Exactly. And Riker wants men to be aware of these forces, to understand how they work, and to actively push back against them. He thinks men have a duty to protect and provide not just for their families, but for the values and institutions that make a healthy society.
So it's not just about you, it's about being part of something bigger.
Right. It's about taking responsibility for the world around you and trying to make it better for yourself, your family, your kids, everyone.
Sounds like a lot to handle. Where do you even start?
Riker gives you a roadmap in Men's Redemption. He lays out a plan for personal growth, strengthening your relationships, getting involved in your community, and making a real difference.
And he believes that masculinity, if you understand it and use it the right way, can be a powerful tool for good.
Absolutely. He sees it as this source of strength, courage, creativity, even compassion, all things that are desperately needed in a world that often feels chaotic and lost.
So for our listener who's on this journey of figuring out men's rights and all the complicated parts of relationships today, Men's Redemption sounds like it could be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. It helps you make sense of those unspoken expectations in marriage, those covert contracts that can cause so many problems. And it gives you practical advice on how men can be strong, build better relationships, and become the best versions of themselves.
If you want to check it out, you can find Men's Redemption, From Apocalypse to New Creation on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. It's a challenging book, but as we've been saying, it's packed with ideas that might just change your whole perspective.
And as you dig into Riker's work, we'll leave you with this to think about. If being a man, if masculinity is truly a force for good, how can you, as an individual, help bring back order and purpose to a world that feels like it's falling apart?